In the dusty town of Sagebrush Gap, where money talks and most folks look the other way, a quiet cowboy rides in with no plans, just a worn saddle and a steady heart. Boone Keller doesn't say much, and he sure didn't come looking for trouble. But when he finds a barefoot boy thrown out the back of a saloon like yesterday's scraps, something shifts. The boy's name is Jesse. His mama's gone, the saloon's turned cold, and the man who owns it, Deke Ratlin, calls the child bad luck. But Boone sees something else, something worth fighting for. As whispers of forged deeds and buried secrets rise, Boone must choose, ride on like he always has, or stay and stand tall, for a boy who's never had anyone call him son. What happens when a cowboy with nothing left to lose dares to protect a legacy that isn't his, but should be? If you believe families made by heart, not by blood, then saddle up. Subscribe now and stick around to see how one boy, one cowboy, and one small town learn what honor really looks like. The dust in Sagebrush Gap didn't wait for permission. It drifted through cracks in floorboards, settled in collars, and painted every soul in the town the same shade of worn. Boone Keller stepped down from his wagon just as the saloon's back door slammed open. A boy, barefoot, rail-thin, and no older than 10, tumbled out like a sack of flour, landing hard on the packed earth. A clatter of tin followed. A boot, not his. "Stay out of the kitchen, runt," barked a voice from inside. Boone paused, one hand still on the reins. The boy didn't cry, just sat up and dusted off his knees like it wasn't the first time. His hair was wild and sun-bleached, and his cheeks were smudged with ash or soot, or both. "You all right?" Boone asked, his voice low but steady. The boy blinked at him, unsure whether to answer. "I said—" Boone stepped closer and crouched, offering his canteen. "You thirsty?" The boy hesitated, then took a sip. "Name's Jesse." Boone nodded. "Boone, you get kicked out of there often?" Jesse wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Only when I'm hungry." Boone looked toward the swinging saloon doors. "Where's your folks?" Jesse pointed a thumb over his shoulder, toward the graveyard hill beyond town. "Mama passed last winter, worked in the saloon till she got sick. Don't know who Pa was. Deke says I'm bad for business." Boone's gaze narrowed. Deke Ratlin owned the Copper Spur Saloon. He'd heard the name, usually followed by complaints about shorted pay or doubled tabs. Ratlin wasn't a man who needed a reason to be cruel, just an opportunity. "You been sleeping out here?" Boone asked. Jesse shrugged. "Sometimes the church lets me in. Mostly I keep to the alleys." Boone stood and offered a hand. "Come on, you can eat with me." Jesse hesitated, scanning Boone's face. Then slowly, he took the hand. They crossed the dusty main road toward Boone's wagon. It wasn't much, just a flatbed with a canvas cover and a crate of tools, but it was cleaner than any alley. Boone pulled out a can of beans, some jerky, and half a loaf of bread. Jesse ate like he hadn't tasted food in a week. "Reckon I owe you," the boy mumbled, mouth full. Boone leaned back against the wagon wheel, arms folded. "Don't owe me nothin', just don't steal my boots in the night." Jesse smirked. "Ain't my size." The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the town. Boone lit a small fire in a circle of stones and pulled an extra blanket from the wagon bed. Jesse lay curled nearby, already half asleep before the stars fully blinked to life. Boone didn't plan to stay in Sagebrush Gap. He was just passing through after a long cattle run, looking for supplies and quiet. But something about the boy's calm after hardship sat heavy with him. A kid shouldn't have to learn to flinch before learning to read. Just as he stood to douse the fire, Jesse stirred. His voice was soft, almost too quiet to catch. "I know where Deke keeps his papers." Boone turned. "What papers?" "Important ones. In the office behind the bar. Money, too. I used to sleep under the desk sometimes. There's a tin box with a lock and one of Mama's necklaces inside. I saw Deke hide it." Boone's brows drew together. "You sure?" Jesse nodded. "She told me never to forget where it was." Boone looked out toward the saloon, where the lanterns still flickered behind stained windows. He hadn't meant to get involved, But some things didn't give you a choice. Tomorrow, he'd buy supplies and head out. Unless the town, and the boy, had other plans. Boone had been in Sagebrush Gap less than a week, but by the third day, folks had already taken notice. Some nodded politely when he passed, others stared too long. Most just kept their distance. A cowboy with a quiet face and a kid tagging behind him drew questions in a town where curiosity had long dried up. Jesse walked a step behind, carrying a small sack of nails Boone had bartered for at the general store. They'd gotten permission from the preacher to build a small pen and lean-to behind the church, just enough for Boone's mule and some shelter at night. It wasn't home, but it was something with a roof and a little peace. Boone had just driven the last post into the dry ground when Sheriff Lonnie Pace strolled up, his silver badge glinting too bright for a man doing nothing useful. He was flanked by two of Deke Ratlin's drinking buddies, both pretending they were just out for a walk. "Morning," Pace said, his smile as crooked as a dry riverbed. Boone wiped the sweat from his brow and nodded. "Sheriff? You setting up permanent residence back here?" Boone stood straight. "Just a pen. Talked to the preacher. Says it's fine." "Well," Pace said, rocking back on his heels, "seems we got a report of loitering. Some say you're squatting on town land." Boone raised a brow. "Is that a crime now? Fixing a fence for a kid who's been sleeping in the alley?" Pace's smile dropped a fraction. "We don't like troublemakers, Mr. Keller, and Deke says the boy's been thieving. Makes folks nervous." Boone looked at Jesse, who stood frozen, sack still clutched in both hands. "He's not stealing," Boone said flatly. "He's surviving." "You planning on staying long?" the sheriff asked, tone hardening. "Long enough to see him on his feet." Pace crossed his arms. "Then we've got ourselves a situation. Town ordinance says no unauthorized structures. That tent of yours counts. That's a fine of $10. Boone pulled a crumpled bill from his pocket and handed it over without a word. The sheriff blinked, clearly hoping for more fight. "You always travel with strays?" he asked, eyeing Jesse. "Only the good ones," Boone said. Pace tucked the bill away and turned. "Don't say you weren't warned." As they left, Jesse muttered, "Why'd he lie like that?" "Because men like Deke pay him to," Boone said. "You see who was with him?" Jesse nodded. "Saloon regulars. They always stand near Deke when he gets loud." Boone looked toward the mayor's office down the street. Simple brick, with an iron weather vane squeaking in the breeze. "Where you sleep matters in a town like this," he said. "But where Deke puts his money, that matters more." That afternoon, Boone stopped by the feed store for planks and wire. He kept his back straight and his tone quiet. The store owner, a gray-bearded man named Harland, looked up over his spectacles and nodded. "Preacher said you're setting up behind the church." "Yes, sir." Harland leaned in. "Deke Ratlin was in here this morning, asked what it'd take to buy the whole lot behind that church." Boone paused. "The same lot we just fenced?" Harland nodded. "Offered the mayor twice what it's worth. Said he's got plans to beautify the west end of town." Boone exhaled slowly. "That right? Might be nothing. Or it might be he wants you gone." Boone thanked him and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. Jesse waited near the mule, watching birds fight over breadcrumbs in the alley. "He's buying the land, ain't he?" Jesse asked. Boone gave a slow nod. "He's trying, but it ain't his yet." The boy looked up. "Then what are we going to do?" Boone squinted toward the saloon, where Deke Ratlin sat in the window, laughing with two men in clean vests and dirtied hearts. "We're going to find out what he's hiding," Boone said, voice low, "and we're going to start with your mama's name." The town clerk's office sat next to the post station, tucked behind a patch of rose bushes that hadn't bloomed right in years. Boone and Jesse walked in just after noon, the heat rolling off the street like steam from a cookpot. The inside smelled of old ink and mildew, with ledgers stacked high on crooked shelves. A tired man with wire-rimmed glasses and thinning hair looked up from a ledger. "Can I help you?" "Boone Keller," Boone said, removing his hat. "I'm looking into land filings near the west end, lot behind the church." "Name on the claim?" Boone shook his head. "That's just it. I heard someone's trying to buy it. Thought I'd check what's already on file." The clerk nodded slowly and pulled a thick book off the shelf. "We got claims logged here going back 20 years. What's the lot number?" Boone handed him a scribbled note the preacher had given him that morning. As the clerk flipped through pages, Boone glanced around. Jesse, standing near the door, was staring at a photo on the wall, an old black and white of the town in its younger days. His face looked far away, like he was trying to pull something from a memory. "Here it is," the clerk said. "Lot was claimed 6 years ago under the name Eliza May Green, then transferred to Deke Ratlin 4 months later. Says it was part of a settled debt." Boone leaned in. Eliza May Green was Jesse's mother. The clerk blinked. "I didn't know that." Boone studied the signature. It was shaky, more scratch than script. "Was this signed in person?" "Supposedly. There's a witness mark here," the clerk said, pointing to a squiggle. "But it's not a full name, just initials, DR. Boone's jaw tightened. "Convenient." Jesse stepped forward. "That's not Mama's writing. I seen her sign school papers before. This looks like someone else did it." The clerk hesitated. If the transfer was contested, it would have needed to be recorded within 60 days. "Which nobody did," Boone said, "'cause nobody knew." The clerk shrugged. "I can't do much without proof." Boone nodded. "Then I'll find some." They stepped outside into the sun, the door creaking shut behind them. Jesse kicked a pebble down the street. "He stole her land, right under her." "Looks that way," Boone said, "but paper's not all that counts." They walked in silence until they reached the chapel steps. The preacher, Reverend Alton, was sweeping leaves from the front walkway. "Thought I might see you," he said, setting the broom aside. Boone explained what they found, careful not to say too much in front of Jesse. The Reverend listened closely, then disappeared into his office for a minute. He returned holding a folded page pulled from a donation ledger. "Eliza gave this about 2 months before she passed," Alton said. "Marked it for future security, said she was saving for the boy. Signed her full name. See here?" Boone took the page. The signature was careful, fluid, familiar, not the scribble from the clerk's book. "This was witnessed by myself and Miss Avery, our organist. It might not be a land deed, but it proves her intent, and her handwriting." Boone looked down at Jesse. The boy didn't say a word, but his eyes shimmered. Back at the wagon that night, Boone pulled the page from his coat and stared at the signature by firelight. He'd known a few folks in his time who tried to write new truths on top of old ones. Deke was just better funded. "You think that page is enough?" Jesse asked from beneath his blanket. "Maybe not by itself," Boone said, "but every lie's got a corner, and I aim to tug until the whole thing unravels." Jesse rolled over, voice sleepy. "Mama always said liars write faster than they read." Boone smiled faintly. "Smart woman." The fire cracked. The town slept. But the truth had started to stir. Sagebrush Gap came alive once a year for the county fair, and folks acted like dust didn't blow sideways, or that the water troughs hadn't run low for weeks. Bright bunting was strung from every post, children ran loose with stick candy, and men in stiff hats leaned on fences, talking bigger than usual. Boone Keller kept to the edges. He stood near the edge of the main square, arms crossed as a makeshift stage was hammered together in front of the general store. Deke Ratlin was there, of course, wearing a spotless vest and a grin wide enough to swallow the sun. Jesse tugged Boone's sleeve. "That's him. Those are the 2 fellas who sit behind Deke in the saloon. One of them signed Mama's deed, I bet." Boone nodded. "Let's listen. Don't jump." As the band played a short tune, Mayor Tilton stepped up and welcomed the crowd, clapping his hands like a preacher at revival. "Now, y'all know Mr. Deke Ratlin. He's one of Sagebrush's most successful sons, and he's got a vision for our town's future." Deke took the stage like he owned it, tipping his hat slow and low. "I believe in growth," he said smoothly. "And I believe in clean streets, safe businesses, and opportunity for every hardworking citizen. That's why I've purchased land on the West End, behind the church, to begin developing Sagebrush's first formal commerce square." The crowd clapped. A few folks looked toward Boone, then quickly looked away. Boone stepped forward, pulling the folded church ledger page from his coat. "Question, Mr. Ratlin," he said, voice level but clear. "You say you own that land?" Deke smiled, not missing a beat. "That's right. Bought it fair and square." Boone held up the ledger. Then maybe you can explain why Eliza Green, the woman who originally held that land, signed this donation log 2 months before she passed. Clearly, carefully, and it don't match the chicken scratch on the deed transfer you filed. Deke's smile faltered for half a blink before he laughed. Well now, he said, I imagine the man's upset. He's been squatting on church land and stirring up old business. This is a fair day, Mr. Keller, not the place for sore claims. Some chuckles rolled through the crowd. Others looked away in discomfort. Boone's jaw tightened. I'm not here to argue, he said, but Jesse here, Eliza's son, he deserves to know the truth about what happened to his mother's property. She wanted him to have something when she was gone. Deke's eyes flicked to Jesse. That boy's got no legal standing. His mama left nothing but debts. Jesse stepped forward, holding something small in his hand. A locket. Brass, dull from years of wear. He opened it to show the picture inside. Eliza, smiling faintly, and Jesse as a baby, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. She told me to keep this safe, he said, voice just loud enough to carry. Said it proved where I came from. The fair went quiet. Even the band stopped tuning. Deke made a dismissive wave. Tugs the heart, but hearts don't sign deeds. Boone looked down at Jesse. The boy's eyes were fierce with quiet fire, but he blinked it away. They stepped off the stage without another word. Behind the cotton candy booth, an old man sat chewing on a toothpick, watching with sharp eyes. He wore boots so worn the soles curled at the edges, and a hat that had seen more decades than some trees. Boone recognized him from town, but didn't know the name. You Keller? The man rasped. That's me. Name's Laramie Joe. Used to handle title swaps back when the town was just half a saloon and a prayer. I seen Eliza Green sign papers once. Her hand was steady as iron. What's on that deed you found? Ain't hers. Boone studied the man. You'd swear to that? Laramie grinned. I'll do better. I still got copies of original land boundaries. Might not be official no more, but they'll show who really had what. Boone offered a hand. Joe shook it with a grip like sandstone. Let's burn the lies off this town, the old man said. The next morning broke dry and windless. Boone rose early, slipping from his blanket before Jesse stirred. The boy slept curled against the wagon rail, the locket still clutched in his small hand like it was the only thing keeping him tied to earth. Boone saddled up and rode to the town clerk's office with Laramie Joe riding beside him. The old man had a folded sheaf of yellowing papers tucked under one arm and a grim expression that hadn't cracked since sunrise. Inside the office, Boone laid the church ledger on the table while Joe unfolded his maps. Hand-drawn boundary lines with notations from a time before Sagebrush Gap had a proper mayor. The clerk stared down, blinking. These match the township plat from 1887. Joe nodded. Eliza Green's land sits right in the center. The deed Ratlin filed cuts clean across it, but look here. This old marker proves she had title rights long before. Boone added, and with the donation ledger, we've got her real signature, not the forged one from that transfer. The clerk rubbed his jaw. You're filing a counterclaim? Today, Boone said. The process took hours. Signatures, swearing under oath, payment for filing fees. But by noon, Boone walked out of the office with stamped copies in his coat pocket. One was for the preacher. The other was for whoever came sniffing around next. Back behind the church, Boone and Jesse hammered in the last plank on the fence. Then Boone carved a sign, slow and deliberate. Keller Ranch. Jesse squinted at it. Ain't got no cows. Not yet, Boone said, smiling faintly. But we got a name, and something worth keeping it for. They leaned the sign on the fence post and stepped back to admire it. Jesse looked taller somehow, though he hadn't grown an inch, just stood straighter. But good moments in Sagebrush Gap didn't last long. That evening, as the sun dipped low and Boone finished feeding the mule, something felt off. The animal sniffed the water trough, stepped back, then staggered sideways and dropped like a sack of flour. Boone ran to her, heart hammering. The mule wheezed, legs twitching. He knelt beside her, trying to check her breath. It was shallow, ragged. Jesse appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. She okay? Boone's jaw clenched. No, Troff's been poisoned. He stood fast and scanned the fence line. Then he saw them. Hoof prints. Fresh. Headed east, toward the saloon. He grabbed his rifle, not to fire, but to track. Stay here, he told Jesse. I can help. Stay. Boone followed the tracks through the alley and down past the abandoned livery. As he rounded the back of the Copper Spur Saloon, he spotted movement by the corral. He stepped closer, slow and silent. Behind a pile of firewood, hidden under burlap, was his missing saddlebag, one he hadn't seen since the week he arrived. He opened it carefully. Inside, his spare boots, rolled bills that had been taken from his coat, and most importantly, his claim papers, including the copy of Eliza's church ledger page. Someone had stolen them, and now wanted them lost for good. A noise made him look up. Deke's foreman stood on the ridge above, arms crossed, watching with a smirk on his face like a man who thought he held the winning hand. Boone met his eyes. Neither man spoke. The foreman turned, spurs jangling, and walked off into the dark. Boone didn't follow. He packed the saddlebag and walked back toward the church, heart heavy but steady. That night, Jesse sat beside him, knees drawn to his chest. They really want us gone, the boy said. Boone nodded. That means we're close to something they're afraid of. Jesse was quiet a moment. Then, we ain't leaving, are we? Boone looked at the carved sign still leaning on the fence post. No, son, he said. We ain't. It didn't take long for the retaliation to come. By noon the next day, Sheriff Lonnie Pace rode up with 2 deputies and a slip of paper in his hand. Boone had just finished patching the mule's stable wall. His animal was still breathing, but barely walking, when he heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Boone Keller, Pace called. You're under arrest for trespassing, theft, and threatening a business owner. Boone didn't flinch. You're serious? Pace held out the warrant like it had teeth. Says here you were seen snooping behind the Copper Spur. Deke says you broke into his property and stole from him. Boone shook his head. That's my saddlebag. Been missing since the day I paid your fine. Deke says otherwise, the sheriff said, stepping forward. I don't get paid to sort stories. I get paid to keep the peace. Jesse ran up from behind the church, breathless. You can't take him. He didn't do anything wrong. Pace didn't even look at him. Keep the kid out of this. Boone raised both hands slowly. I'll go. No need to scare the boy. Jesse clung to Boone's coat. Please don't. Boone knelt down. Stay here, with the preacher, and keep the papers safe. The boy's eyes shimmered, but he nodded. Boone handed over his satchel to the reverend, who had stepped silently out onto the chapel steps, watching it all unfold with tight lips. They hauled Boone to the small jail at the edge of town, a 1-cell room with bars so rusted the keys probably stuck every third turn. Boone sat on the cot and said nothing. Pace leaned in through the bars. You're stirring up things that don't concern you. Best remember you ain't from here. Boone looked him in the eye. Neither's the truth, but it has a way of settling in. The sheriff scoffed and walked off. Later that night, the door creaked open and a figure stepped into the dimly lit space. A woman in a worn shawl, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and a familiar sadness Boone had seen once before, in the saloon. You Boone Keller? She asked softly. That's me. She pulled a chair close to the bars. I used to work for Deke, served drinks, heard things. Boone sat up straighter. Like what? She looked toward the door, then back at him. 6 months ago, he got drunk and bragged to a customer about burning title papers after Eliza died. Said no one would miss him with her gone. Called it a clean slate. Boone's fists clenched, but his voice stayed even. You'd swear to that? If someone will protect me after, she said. Boone nodded. You got my word. She pressed something into his hand through the bars, a folded napkin with scrawled notes. Names, dates. Not official, but it's what I heard. He kept the locket, too. Said it made him look soft, so he hid it in his safe. Boone studied her. Why now? She looked toward the church bell peeking above the rooftops. Because that boy deserves better. She slipped out the door before the deputy returned. Boone hid the napkin in his boot. The next morning, Reverend Alton arrived with word that made Boone sit forward. "Marshal Briggs is riding in," the preacher said. "Routine inspection of county filings. He's not local. He don't owe Deke or Pace nothing." Boone smiled for the first time in days. "Then maybe the wind's about to change." The preacher nodded. "Word's spreadin'. Folks saw what happened at the fair. People are startin' to talk, quiet-like." "Let 'em," Boone said, standing as the deputy unlocked the door. "I've got a witness, and a ledger, and a boy who's carrying more truth than this whole town's ready for." As Boone stepped out into the light, Jesse stood across the street, still clutching the satchel. His face lit up. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Justice was coming, one step at a time. Marshal Elijah Briggs rode into Sagebrush Gap just after daybreak, dust trailing behind him like a comet's tail. Tall in the saddle with a coat that had seen long miles and eyes that missed nothing, he dismounted in front of the sheriff's office without a word. Sheriff Pace stepped out fast, wiping his palms on his vest. "Mornin', Marshal. Wasn't expecting you till next month." Briggs looked him over. "Got word of discrepancies in land filings. Thought I'd come sooner." Boone stood nearby with Reverend Alton and Jesse, watching the exchange from under the church's awning. Briggs's tone was dry, but it carried weight. Boone had known men like him, not loud, but built of stone and judgment. Sheriff Pace tried to smile. "Well, I can assure you." "Don't assure me," Briggs cut in. "Just point me to the records. I'll do the reading." By noon, the town hall filled faster than it ever had. Folks who usually kept quiet in corners showed up in clean shirts, whispering in pews and under hats. Boone sat near the front, Jesse on his right, clutching the satchel with the church ledger and Laramie Joe's maps tucked safe inside. Mayor Tilton called the room to order. Marshal Briggs stood beside him, arms crossed, stone-faced. "Mr. Ratlin," the mayor said, "you've been asked to present your documentation regarding the West End property claim." Deke swaggered forward, holding a polished folder in both hands. "This is the original deed, signed by Eliza May Green and witnessed, transferred for debt owed and filed proper with the clerk." Boone stood slowly. "If that's true, why don't her signatures match?" The crowd stirred. Boone walked to the front and held up the church ledger page. "This here was signed by Eliza, witnessed by Reverend Alton and Miss Avery. Her signature is clear, smooth, and consistent. Now look at the one on Deke's deed. Looks like it was scratched out by a man in a hurry." Briggs took both pages and studied them. He said nothing. "I also have this," Boone continued, pulling out the hand-drawn boundary from Laramie Joe. "Shows Eliza's land rights based on the original township plot. Never legally sold, never transferred without due notice." Laramie Joe stood from the back. "I was the title runner in them days. I remember Eliza. She wouldn't have handed over that land to Deke, or anybody." More murmurs. Even Mayor Tilton shifted uncomfortably. Boone turned to the crowd. "And Jesse, Eliza's son, still holds the locket she left him. Inside is her likeness and his baby picture. That may not be legal proof, but it's a mother's final word." Jesse stepped forward, face pale but steady, and opened the locket for all to see. "Mama told me to never forget where I came from." The room went still. Even Deke's usual hangers-on leaned back in their chairs. Marshal Briggs cleared his throat. "Mr. Ratlin, do you contest the authenticity of these documents?" Deke's smile was brittle now. "They're sentimental, not legal." Briggs nodded once. "Then I ask you to unlock the safe in your saloon. Now, publicly." Deke's eyes went wide. "That ain't standard procedure." "It is today," Briggs said flatly. "Or I file an obstruction report with the circuit judge." With all eyes on him, Deke had no choice. The walk from town hall to the Copper Spur was tense. Half the town followed. Inside the saloon, Deke fumbled with the safe, hands shaking just enough to show. Briggs opened the safe himself. Inside, unregistered gold coins, half-burned documents, a pouch of cash, and a stack of blank deed templates, several with forged marks already filled in. Boone saw one with Eliza's name half-written. At the bottom sat Jesse's locket, still closed. Briggs turned slowly. Sheriff Pace, place Mr. Ratlin under arrest for fraud, tampering with public filings, and illegal possession of municipal property. Pace hesitated. Then, under the weight of every eye in the room, he took out his cuffs. Jesse watched as Deke's wrists were shackled. Boone placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's for your mama." Jesse looked up, eyes wet but smiling. "And for us." The next morning, the front page of the Sagebrush Sentinel read like something out of a dime novel. Local saloon owner arrested for fraud, forgery, and theft of land. Folks passed the paper around like it was a campfire story come true. The Copper Spur was shuttered tight, its windows dark, and Deke Ratlin sat behind bars for the first time in his silver-buttoned life. Boone stood just outside the sheriff's office, arms crossed, as Marshal Briggs filled out paperwork with the circuit clerk. Jesse leaned on the rail beside him, sipping from a tin cup of weak coffee. The boy had hardly let go of the locket since the safe was opened. "Think he'll stay locked up?" Jesse asked. Boone gave a slow nod. "With what they found in that safe, he's going to be answering questions in 3 counties. Inside, Deke sat slumped in the cell, no vest, no smirk, just a man stripped of the lies that once made him big. Sheriff Pace hovered near the desk, avoiding Boone's eyes. His badge looked duller now. Briggs emerged with folded documents in his hand. "The territorial office confirmed Jesse's guardianship transfer this morning, legal and binding." Boone raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Briggs gave a half shrug. "Sometimes justice moves quicker when it's got a crowd behind it." He handed over the sealed letter. "Says here you're officially the boy's guardian, for as long as you're willing." Boone turned to Jesse, who looked up from the cup and blinked. "You're sure?" Boone asked quietly. Jesse grinned. "Ain't no one else ever asked me." Boone placed a hand on his shoulder. Then it settled. As word spread, changes started rippling through town. The mayor, red-faced and twitchy, issued a formal apology at Sunday's service, standing awkwardly between Reverend Alton and Miss Avery. He promised more oversight, more transparency. Folks nodded, but no one clapped. Sheriff Pace turned in his badge 2 days later, muttering something about needing a slower life. The town appointed a temporary replacement until the next vote. Reverend Alton nominated Boone. "I'm not a lawman," Boone said plainly. "No," Briggs agreed. "But you're steady, and we could use steady." Boone didn't answer then, but folks saw him start wearing his old hat again, the one with the narrow brim and sun-bleached crease, the kind that said a man had done some riding and planned to keep riding until the work was through. Jesse returned to the church schoolhouse that week. Miss Avery gave him a desk near the window and a paper tablet of his own. The other kids didn't tease him anymore. Some even asked if they could come by and help feed the mule, who was slowly recovering. Meanwhile, Boone rebuilt the pen behind the chapel. Stronger this time, with fencing Laramie Joe donated and nails from Harlan's store. Folks dropped by with tools, pies, even a hammer engraved with the word hope. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about what people could be if they remembered how. That Saturday, Reverend Alton read the territorial update aloud. "Property at Lot 27W, previously filed under false claim, is hereby restored to original beneficiary, as represented through minor child Jesse Green and guardian Boone Keller." The church bell rang long and clear. Boone placed the official letter in a tin box and slid it under the bunk in his wagon. He looked out across the field where wildflowers were starting to bloom again. Nothing fancy, but real. Jesse joined him, eyes wide. "You think Mom'd be proud?" Boone crouched down, voice thick. "I think she'd be proud of you." The boy nodded once, then turned toward the makeshift gate. "You gonna put up the new sign?" Jesse asked. Boone smiled. "Thought you might want to." Jesse picked up the wooden plank that read Keller Ranch and nailed it to the fresh post. It stood firm under the late-day sun. For the first time, it felt permanent. The sun rose over Sagebrush Gap like a golden promise, casting long shadows across the dew-kissed grass behind the chapel. For the first time in weeks, Boone Keller woke not to the sound of fear or whispers of what-ifs, but to the gentle creak of wood and the soft patter of bare feet. Jesse was already outside, trying to coax a calf toward a shallow trough they'd set up beside the rebuilt pen. The boys' laughter rang out like wind chimes caught in a soft breeze. Pure, clean, and finally free. Boone stepped off the porch of the new cabin they'd raised with help from townsfolk. Nothing grand, just one room with a stove, 2 bunks, and a stone hearth. But it stood solid, and it was theirs. Above the mantel, right where Boone had promised, hung Eliza's locket in a small carved box, opened, displayed with care. Jessie turned, grinning. She drank. Took a while, but she did it. Boone leaned against the post and nodded. She'll figure it out, long as someone's patient. Like you? Boone chuckled. Like you. Life didn't slow down just because justice had been served. There were still fences to mend, soil to till, and folks who stopped by with advice or leftover pie. Miss Avery brought old readers and a slate so Jessie could study proper at home, too. Laramie Joe dropped off a rusted branding iron and said, "Every ranch needs a mark." Boone hadn't used it yet, but he kept it clean. The townspeople looked at Boone differently now, no longer as an outsider passing through, but as someone who'd planted more than a stake. Even the mayor tipped his hat awkwardly when they crossed paths. One afternoon, Marshal Briggs returned to finish the last of his filings. He stood beside the cabin, arms folded, watching the wind tug at the new Keller Ranch sign. "You still thinking about that deputy badge?" he asked. Boone scratched his beard. "Thought about it. You'd be good at it, fair, level." Boone glanced toward Jessie, who was trying to teach the calf how to walk a circle. "I already got one job, maybe the most important one I'll ever hold." Briggs gave a slow nod. "Then I won't press." As the marshal left, Reverend Alton stopped by with a small book and an envelope. "It's from the circuit judge. Says the land deed's been certified under Jessie's name, with you as guardian and trustee until he comes of age." Boone looked down at the envelope, then handed it to Jessie. "Here, it's yours." The boy's eyes lit up as he took it, careful as if it might break. "Moma'd never believe this." "I think she would," Boone said. "She believed in you more than the law ever did." That night, the two of them sat outside on the porch, stars wheeling slowly overhead. Boone poured 2 cups of warm cider, handing one to Jessie. "I never thought I'd be here," Boone said, half to himself. Jessie looked up. "You mean in sagebrush?" Boone shook his head. "I mean, being someone who belongs somewhere. I always figured I'd ride forever." Jessie sipped the cider. "You still ride, just with a reason now." Boone smiled, his eyes catching the glint of starlight off the locket inside the cabin. "Yeah," he said. "I reckon I do." The fire crackled. The land lay quiet and whole again. And under that wide, endless sky, where wind carried the scent of wild sage and old hope, a boy and a cowboy sat side by side, not bound by blood, but by something stronger. Family, legacy, and the kind of love that stays. If you believe a cowboy's worth is measured in love, not land, subscribe and ride with us again.